Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we are going to be talking about the upcoming cyclocross calendar. The season is still far away, but now we have quite a lot of time on our hands, so we're going to discuss that. And with me to do that is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Maybe briefly, we leave the road talking to more road dedicated podcasts because there are already so many out of there, but we saw a number of good performances from cyclocross riders. Of course, a lot of attention going out to Van der Poel, second place. Lots of talk about his tactics in the Tour of Flanders. Should he have played poker with Pogacar? A relatively strong Van Aert finishing fourth, I guess, roughly where you would expect him with that start list. I thought he did quite well, but I was more interested in actually seeing the performance on the women's side. Puk Pieterse really racing more matured, where in recent years she was very attacking, making very bold and eager moves, but this year kind of taking more easy and maximizing her results. A third place in one of the funniest sprints I've ever seen against Ferrand Prevot. Two riders with zero acceleration going against each other. And honestly, I guess for me the most surprising is Zoe Backstedt. She had a really good ride there. In previous years she struggled with the climbing in those races, but this year she did really well. Fifth place in the Tour of Flanders is a tremendous result, and she's of course still very young. So I thought that was very interesting to see. I thought that for me it was probably the highlight and most surprising thing from the cyclocross riders. The performance of Zoe Backstedt, who now is being tipped as a winner/podium contender for Paris-Roubaix, because that is a race where she's done well in the past already.
That will be an interesting race for sure, and you're almost thinking like it can only get better in a way. So I think that is definitely something that you can to look forward to, and who knows what can happen. But it always has been a tricky race, also how to plan it, the tactics and all. So it is tricky. So you have to make sure that you are, with the right moves, and we have to see. But definitely, would be someone that would be a fan favorite in a way if she was going to be able to pull that off. So let's see, and that will be an interesting race.
Certainly, I look forward to it. It could be a nice one. But of course, the reason we are here is to discuss a bit of the calendars. The big series have their calendars. The World Cup calendar got completed probably 3-4 weeks ago now. So we should go over that, of course, being the most important series. We already reported earlier, I don't remember at what time in the cross season, but we spent some time talking about a rumor that Ostrava was going to host the opening round, and that is proven true. On the 27th of November, the World Cup will get underway in the Czech Republic Friday night under the floodlights at a stunning venue, easily the most pretty venue on the course. 2 days later, Tabor, which is the opening for the Youth World Cups. Then a break week from the World Cup before Glasgow takes place on the 13th of November. Then we hit the Christmas period. They managed to squeeze one more race in there. We start with double weekend Antwerp-Koksijde. Then a week after we have another double header, Gavere-Namur, empty day, Besançon. Then the Christmas period ends with Zonhoven on the 3rd of January. After National Championships weekend, it is Benidorm, a modern classic, we can really say, of the reformed World Cup. And we end with a double header before the World Championships, Hamme taking the place of Maasmechelen and Hoogerheide retaining its place as final round of the World Cup. So one thing I think here to note before we have your opinion, Issam, is that Hamme, this is the venue that you know from Hamme. It's the one with the labyrinth, which typically was at the end, and in recent years was in the start of the lap. The long start-finish straight, which kind of curves leftwards now. And in the past, of course, rightwards. They changed that direction, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago. Later, we'll come over a new race in Hamme as well, that one being in Hamme-Zogge. So the World Cup race in Hamme, that is the race, the Flandrien Cross, which is with the labyrinth. So, Issam, we are here with 12 races, still the known format, a packed schedule from pretty much December until the end of January, just over 2 months. Your thoughts on the calendar?
There are definitely improvements, or there's a sign of improving in terms of how the calendar is now shaping up. I think that Ostrava is definitely a plus, something that we have discussed before, and it was definitely a rumor that was starting to become more and more real. And I'm grateful that Flanders Classics is thinking in that direction and being a bit more flexible with their way of interpreting the way they should be doing their race weekends in a sense. And it's a format that I think should be looked at for maybe even something for continuation, but also in maybe in other moments of the season, of the calendar overall, that they can place it in such a way. And I think that Glasgow was definitely a surprise in a sense, but also something that we were hoping for, especially when Dublin also fell through and was no longer part of the calendar. It was missing such a race, and I think that Glasgow will be a race that normally be a great watch for the fans, and I think that the venue will be capable of delivering a good course. I think that the fans will also be excited. The spectators, there's something to look out for sure. And if you look at the negatives of that calendar, that there are definitely some negatives. I think that the way they are trying to fill the Christmas period with as many races as they can, almost also physically for a rider, I think they're just trying to do that, and I think that is obviously understandable if you look at it from a financial standpoint, and they have to make money. If you look at it from a side of a healthy sport in a sense, and a sport that generating revenue and being healthy in other periods of the calendar, I don't think that is a great thing to see, that the focus is so much on that Christmas period. And I think for sure, if you look at how we try to cover the race, we notice that obviously the Christmas period is where there is more engagement. It becomes even bigger. That is just where the sport is at this point. But it is just, if you look at it, it's just a phenomena that is happening, that is not something that as a sport that you should look at and be like, okay, well, this is a great point to be in. You have to look into the deficits as well, and try to maybe fix it in a sense, and try to have the attention spread over your entirety of the calendar as much as possible. And how you're going to do that is going to be obviously the big question. You can see more the positives than the negatives, and maybe we should, in a sense. But it is there are definitely some negatives on this calendar and the way it's done. But that is maybe a bigger issue than only the calendar of the World Cup itself.
Lots of things to digest, because of course there is always a lot of debate sparked into the World Cup. It's never just about the World Cup. Maybe to break it down, we go over it kind of phase by phase. So first we have the opening, Ostrava Tabor. I think we can both be quite positive about that, Issam, because we've both advocated for the sport to kind of hinge together and kind of cluster these races that are geographically close. So I think it only makes sense to put this on a Friday and a Sunday. We both have said cyclocross should have more night races. Not every race needs to be like Diegem, but it's spectacular and it can really add something. And Friday night, there's plenty of people who want to watch sports on weeknights, especially Friday night. I mean, there's a reason that there is a lot of sports that are hosting in midweek events. I mean, the football competitions normally have one game or two games on Friday night. There is darts on Friday night. There is a lot of sports going on Friday nights, and cyclocross really should also capitalize on that being in the winter. So I think we can both be positive of that. I don't really want to kind of praise Flemish Classics too much for this. This was kind of handed to them. Ostrava came to them. They put up this idea. They wanted to do the double with Tabor, and I'm glad that Flemish Classics stepped on board. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day if sometimes Flemish Classics does recruit these races. Like Benidorm was a real top-notch investment by Flemish Classics. It's just, the point is, not everything comes from them. There's sometimes also just strong, local, passionate organizers. And you see, again, it's the Czechs that are really driving the innovation, because this year Tabor, all the races for the youth categories were broadcast on YouTube. That racked up without any promotion, nothing really. It racked up about 100,000 views across that. So I would say that was a relatively good success. And now they innovate as well with a midweek round and a double header. It's not necessarily uncommon. We've seen this in the US before with Fayetteville being a midweek race. We've seen the double and sometimes even triple headers over there with 3 races in 1 week. But now we're seeing part of that as well here on Europe, and I would say that is a step in the right direction.
And don't forget, I mean, this is a concept that we also have seen in the Christmas period when they want to make money. So it is not something new or revolutionary in a sense, but it is good to see that now outside of the Christmas period, there is at least the idea to be open for this kind of ways of handling a race week. And I think that is, we have to see how it will play out, obviously. But I think in a sense it is arguably the way to go if you want to maybe have races which are, in a sort of a double header, that are not that far off from each other. It has to be reasonable as well, in a sense. You have to try and make sure that it is reasonable for the riders, for the teams, for the organizers. It has to make sense. And I think that this just really made a lot of sense in a way. And so I think that it is just, despite the fact that you can obviously say that the Flanders Classics got it in a way handed to them, I still think that it was good from their side that they were open for it and that they were able to, to put it in such a way that it kind of works.
Then we have, after the Czech doubleheader, an empty weekend. I would say this is a positive, but it's a positive but. Because I think it would be good for the World Cup to have an empty weekend somewhere over there, and seen it in the past few years. There's a lot of riders that are skipping those races. They want to go training. They need to find time to rebuild freshness for the busy Christmas period. So, positive. However, for the past few years, Flanders Classics has said, we can't do an empty weekend because in an empty weekend, another classification is just going to put their own race there. That will be raced and they'll skip the next World Cup round. Fair point. But what has happened now? There's an empty weekend in the World Cup. Guess which series is organizing a race there? It's the Super Prestige. They put Ruddervoorde in that spot. Not a coincidence, Ruddervoorde Classic. They've been suffering from poor attendance numbers super early in the season, and this just seems like a little reward to them. A prime date, a Sunday, the only Sunday between the start of November and the World Championships that it's awarded to a non-World Cup, and it's a Flanders Classic sanctioned race in Ruddervoorde in their series. So, if you follow the logic, which isn't too uncommon because many riders prioritize the Super Prestige, riders are going to race Ruddervoorde and then, I fear, skip the next race because they'll be training. It's just hypocritical. For 3 years, every interview you say, we can't do that, we can't accommodate the riders, and then you do it, but you still kind of just jump the gun and put your own race there. That I think is just sad. It would have been a good idea to have that empty weekend, but then leave it empty. Declare a protected status or something over that weekend. Just say, we can invent these rules to help the World Cup, and that means that, for instance, in the Tabor Ostrava weekend, every other race that wants to be on the calendar needs to be approved by the UCI. Then you can also just say, we're just going to do that for an empty weekend to protect the World Cup. You're working with the UCI. You make the rules. You write them. You don't even need to follow them on the international quota of the World Cup. So it's, I think, just sad.
It is, yeah. I think sad is definitely a word to how to describe it, and it is, questionable how Flanders Classics filled that weekend with kind of their own race. It's not great, and I think that it is. I hope that it's not going to be the case. That Glasgow is actually in a strong position that the riders will not skip it. Because I feel like, as a first time, you kind of need to, also for the organizers, they're going to put a lot of effort in, the people, the volunteers, everything. And, money is one thing, but I think that you also want to have that attention in a way, and a very good race and a good start list, a strong start list. And I think that if you're not able to have that in your first year, I'm not saying that it could be detrimental for the race itself. We heard from the camp of Pidcock that potentially he could actually be starting. That would be great. I think that would do well. And we have to wait and see what Flanders Classics will try to do, because we have seen it in the past that they allegedly are able to sometimes persuade certain riders starting. So who knows? Maybe that could be a thing. We have to wait and see, and we have to wait and see how the planning will go and how the riders will do it. But it is a danger. It is a danger for sure, because it is a period where riders think about that very busy Christmas period where everyone wants to be good, where no one really wants to have a misstep and want their form to be at their best, because there are so many opportunities in that period. just in 2 weeks you're able to, you get like 6, 7, 8, 9 opportunities of races where you could potentially be at the forefront. So that is the moment to shine, apart from the nationals, Europeans, and world championships. So it is understandable that riders will be looking at that period and be like, nah, I could squeeze in a training camp, and we have seen it in the past. And I hope that Glasgow will survive it. I hope that it will. I think that they could. That it's not going to be as bad as we have seen in the past, but it is gonna be it is gonna be definitely a thing to look out for, and hope that it's not going to play out the way the doom scenario kind of could be.
After the empty weekend, it's the new race, Glasgow. It's the only race that currently already has a webpage with information on the World Cup season. They're holding the race in Kelvin Grove Park, Glasgow, and I am quite positive about this, and I think everyone should be. It's long overdue that the World Cup returns there after Milton Keynes. They've been working for it for a couple of years, and this is a real Flanders Classics recruitment. Glasgow first initiated the contact after the Super Worlds because they were kind of sad that they didn't have a cyclocross race and things can add a real spectacle. It's right in the city centre. Yes, okay, it comes at the expense of Terralba, but that race, I didn't really mind it. I thought it was quite funny, but you could really see that the whole idea of, riders are going to do their training camp on Sardinia didn't really materialize, and the start list there this year were quite sad. It's in return quite sad to see that there's no more World Cup race in Italy. That was one of the targets that Flanders Classics had. First, we need to get a World Cup race back in Italy. Val di Sole had a good first year. Second and third year were more difficult, especially the third. Terralba had a tough relationship as well, because the first time in Cabras was cancelled, and then this year most people were training, and now the date of Glasgow, it could be a training weekend, but let's hope not, because it could be a really good race in the city centre. This is the most positive improvement for me on the World Cup calendar, finally a race in the UK.
I think a highlight for sure on the World Cup calendar, and as we said before, we hope just that race will get the start list that it somewhat deserves. It would be great to see, for example, also Bakstedt start, and of course, I think that Cameron Mason will try, everything within him to be able to be there. I wouldn't say at his best, but as good as possible. It carries so many positives, and that is just great. And I really look forward to that race. I really hope that will be, as I said before, a great success, and it is truly the highlight. And yeah,
the Christmas period then. Big success, a few more €1,000 flowing to the organizers because they managed to squeeze another race in there. It wasn't busy enough, so this year the Christmas period overall is expanded to 2.5 weeks, starting on Wednesday after Glasgow, and then we're just going to race all the way through until the 3rd of January with 6 World Cups, half of the series taking place, doubleheader Antwerp-Koksijde, even tougher doubleheader Gaver and Namur. 2 days later Besançon with a transfer, that will be a tough one as well. And then on the 3rd of January, Zonhoven. I think my problem here is kind of just how many races there are. Like, okay, you can say, well, it's slightly less busy in terms of how many double headers and triple and quadruple headers there are, but it's still one more race added to that, and the period is prolonged to now lasting from the Wednesday before the weekend before Christmas. We have a race on Christmas Day, then we have a race on Boxing Day, then we have a race the day after Boxing Day, then we have a transfer day to get to France, and then the day after we have Diegem. Like, of course, not all of those races are in the same series, but it's busy, and for riders, we've made this point again and again, it's too much. They're forced to make choices, they lose important income for them, and in a way it's fine that you need to make choices, but I just think that this cannibalization of the Christmas period is kind of goes against the point that they made when they started the World Cup, because they were all about recognition and every race must be on a Sunday, so everybody knows the World Cup is for Sundays, and the Christmas period is very confusing. There's a lot of races, there's a lot of riders skipping a lot of races, especially on the women's side. You saw last year that there were a few races over Christmas with really poor start fields, and as much as fine, and the riders have their right to do that, but it it's an interesting conflict because on one hand you see that races are leaving the early season dates to move to Christmas because they think that they're going to have a better chance of attracting Van Aert, Van der Poel, Nijs, or Del Grosso and have a real eye catcher, and they can really earn more money by drawing more spectators. But on the other hand, you also see that that isn't the case for all races at Christmas, because there are so many races at Christmas now that you see that classics like Koksijde are in fact attracting fewer spectators, because people don't feel the need to drive all the way to Koksijde when there's a race around the corner for them. So the races are more drawing from their own little bubble around them, because if people go to 1 or 2 races at Christmas, then yeah, for them, okay, Namur is a classic. Maybe I'll go down there, but then I'm not also going to go to Koksijde a week before. So it's an interesting little dynamic where you can really see that it's busier every year. This year they managed to squeeze another World Cup in there, so I guess for them it's a win, but I still think it's a little bit too much in that phase of the year, but it's also incremental to the formula that they've chosen for, right? Because they won 12 races and they've pushed that start of the World Cup a week further back each year in the reformed format, so that Christmas period has to become this busy if you want to meet your number of races, 12, which Flemish Classics has to reach, because else they're definitely making a loss on their contract with the UCI, because they overpaid for that contract in a bidding war with Golazzo.
What I was thinking about last year is there is not much anticipation, because you basically hop from one race to the other, and I feel like it almost hurts the good racing that you have in those races. That it's like, because you have, arguably you could potentially have like 3-4 races where there is great racing, but it almost feels like, yeah, it almost feels like a regular thing, and then you have like a race in between that is, you know, not a great start list, and overall not really of any importance. And sure, that's then the race that you skip, but I just feel like you kind of need a bit more anticipation, especially for races that are World Cup. You kind of need like I wouldn't say a huge gap, but you need a gap at least that you can say, okay, then we have a World Cup, and then we have another World Cup like a week later. And you can have a midweek. I'm not saying that you cannot, and maybe even a double header, but I don't think that the way they are doing it right now, I don't think that is the right way to do it, because I feel that a lot of good racing is lost because of the continuation and the way that it repeats itself. And at some point you also look at the races and you already kind of know what the field will look like. And because of that accumulation of amount of races, you also kind of know how it will roughly play out. And I'm not saying that if you're going to have less races, it's going to change that dynamic. It could very well be the same thing. But I think that that level of anticipation could really help with the product overall. And it is just a bit busy, and it is a bit too much, and it hurts maybe a little bit, you know, certain elements of entertainment maybe even. So, you know, it's all about the money, and we know that, and there is definitely more attention for cyclocross. You can see it, you know, internationally, and also in the most important region for Flanders Classics in Belgium itself. There is just, you know, way more interest. It is also the period where the giants, in a way, are trying to see how far they come with, you know, the regulars in a way of cyclocross. And of course that is the storytelling that the media will go with, and obviously everyone does. But it is just, as I said, that anticipation is kind of lost. We had some great racing in the Christmas period, but if you're going to ask a casual to really pick moments in that Christmas period, it will almost be like a sort of an overlap of, oh yeah, there was this maybe, and there was that. And I think that is maybe an issue. You know, sometimes you need a break, and less is more is definitely a statement that I feel is applicable for this period.
As I'm kind of unfazed by the end of the season, Benidorm, and then a double weekend before Worlds, the same as last year's just a race swap, which I don't think is too incremental. We can go a little bit further into that format as some over the Christmas period and stuff, and how busy it is. It's busy because of all those other races. If it would just be the World Cup, it would kind of be fine, but it's not just the World Cup. There's so many other races that it really hurts the riders, like I said before, and they complain every year that it's too busy, they need to make choices, it hurts their financial standing. The full-time cyclocross riders need the series prize money. They don't have high base salaries. Lots of them, even top 10 riders in the world, are making 2,000-3,000 euros a month, and that's a fine salary, don't get me wrong. There's many people who work harder jobs in the sense that the burden that's on them and the uncertainty that it brings, but it's not the case that every cyclocross rider is making a really rich living just from their base salary. Cyclocross riders are dependent on start money. Well, the start money has evaporated for lots of riders. That's totally been moved to a few of the top guys getting a lot of money because they bring with them a lot of spectators. Then they are reliant on the prize money, and that's not insignificant. Winning the X2O trophy, 30,000 euros. Like, that is a considerable amount of money. Even if you finish somewhere a bit further down, you're still talking about tens, thousands of euros. And riders need that because that's the way cyclocross is structured. It's a very incentive-based sport. It's not as bad as tennis, where you have a brand deal and the rest is all ranking money. But there are lower base salaries because you get to pocket your own start money. You get to keep your prize money. So that's the way the sport is formed, and the complaints and worries of the riders should therefore be taken seriously. And I don't think that that's being done. My thoughts on the overall World Cup, despite that, within the current format, I think it's about as good as it gets. Because there are not that many more options to go international. But that brings me to the point. Within this format, I think it's an improvement from last year, a significant step in the right direction. Probably I would rate it an 8 out of 10. I'm quite positive about it. But the more I was thinking about it recently, the more doubts I have about it. Because is it really what the World Cup is about? Is the World Cup about having this many races? And every time I come back and I look at that World Cup calendar before Flemish Classics took over, look at seasons like 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Like, let's go to that season, right? 2018, 2019 season. We started with a doubleheader in the US, then we had Bern, then Tabor, 3 Belgian races, Pontchâteau and Hogerheide. Compared to that, Issam, what has changed? We have 3 more races, went from 9 to 12. All those races are Belgium. And if we look at the races outside of the Netherlands and Belgium, we in fact lost one. So we are quite far into Flemish Classics organizing this. And they've done some good things. And cyclocross isn't at rock bottom where we were around 2015. But overall, I don't think that much has happened. Despite them wanting to make it look like the sport is thriving internationally. They've just replaced other successful races. I mean, Bern was a successful race. It had quite a lot of spectators. It was a little bit funny course, but can't be too critical. Pontchâteau was a successful one. Well, we're now in Besançon. Doesn't really change anything. Same country, same passionate fans. Tabor is still there. The American races had their fair share of time where they drew quite some spectators. It always added that international prestige to it, like an actual World Cup, not a European Cup. And now, okay, we're a European Cup. It's fine, I guess, because of the format as well. It's hard to kind of fit that in. But internationally, despite all these talks, and I come back to it, like, walk your talk. I'm a big believer in that. Like, if you say stuff, you should be held accountable to it. And that goes, like, if I make a prediction and I'm wrong, then I'm fine with people pointing that out. It goes much further as well. It goes to promising things as politicians, promising things on your work. Like, if you say something that you're going to do something, or that you're close to doing stuff, or that's kind of where you want to take this, then also back that up. And then don't, like, move the goalposts and claim a win on something else. If you're setting a framework of, the World Cup, we're going to go 16 races, international, around the globe, multiple continents, and you keep narrowing the steps down, and now all of a sudden we're at, but it's a success because we have one more international race than last year, then I don't really think that we're really moving anywhere, because again, you might take a step forward from where we were, and that I give them credit for. I think it's better than what they had. But if we take a look at before they took over, I don't think that it is really that much better, because all we got was a bunch of more races at Christmas. We've not had an exciting World Cup overall fight because their point system sucks. Like, Niels van der Putte raced every single race in this series. Van der Poel skipped 4 and beat them by just over 70 points. Thibaut Nys skipped 2 races as opposed to the 4. Okay, yeah, 2 bad results, but still, like, it was not close. The point system favors riders skipping races. 40 points is easy to overcome, especially with the heavy gaps between first and second. 10 points, then 5, then 3, and then for the rest it just runs 1 point at the time. But is that a problem? No, because Flanders Classics wanted that to happen. They wanted the top riders, Van Aert, Van der Poel, to be able to win the classification just because they didn't race anything, but they're the big name. They admitted to that in an interview 2 years ago. So I think in that sense, my problem with everything is that it's kind of easy to lean back and look at, oh, we've done this or we've done that. But if you keep your eyes on the ball and look at where we were a number of years ago, the World Cup hasn't really improved that much in terms of races that we're going, in terms of suspense for the overall because of the point system. There have been a few strong additions, Benidorm, but again, like I said, the races that have been replaced by those races were not bad events either. They had their spectators, they had their nice course, they had a charm. It's fine that there's evolution and that some of these races come and go. I'm not a traditionalist in that I say, oh, Pontchâteau was an S-tier race that must come back. No, it's not one of my favorite courses, but I just think that overall the progress is being blown out a little bit, which is natural to the organizers, but I don't agree with that narrative fully.
It's like you've bought this gadget from some random Chinese website and it doesn't exceed any of your expectations. You're very disappointed. You want to return it. You're not really able to because it's quite the hassle. And then at the end of it, when you actually use the gadget, it's not bad. It somewhat does what you want, and overall, then at the end of it, you kind of accept that it wasn't really what you anticipated, what you expected, but it is all right and it does somewhat its job. And I think that is what it is right now with the calendar. It does the job in a sense, but it lacks so much. And if you look at the promises and the talks that we had from Flanders Classics, it almost feels like they were trying to please the UCI in the beginning phase of it and really showing that they really want to turn in a new direction. And at the end of it, when reality somewhat hits and the UCI maybe doesn't really put that much pressure anymore, I think that Flanders Classics is rather content with the position they are in right now. And in a sense, rightfully so, because they have to look at what comes in and what comes out and the money overall. And, financially, they have put on arguably a great calendar and a system for themselves in which it just really benefits them. But I think if you look at the sport, I think that I speak for more than only myself, but where we want to see this sport head and the potential that we think it has, you could arguably say a farce. If you compare it to what we expected at the beginning of Flanders Classics and that journey that they went in with the World Cup, that was with a lot of, I wouldn't say incidents, but it had its troubles. It had this criticism early on, and there was almost like a fight, social media and with the media overall and in the newspapers. There was a lot of anticipation, and it just, somewhere along the way, we have kind of just accepted, there was definitely a couple of years that was disappointing, and now we are at this point that we are happy with, a couple of new additions and the current state. Well, we should not be, but it's just that our expectations have lowered a little bit. We have been a bit more realistic because we see what the calendar currently is. We see where the money is. We see that Christmas period is so difficult to let go because they are afraid of the fact that if they would leave that Christmas period to other classifications, that they will make use of it and that they will be in the center of attention. And that is definitely not what Flanders Classic wants to see, but I don't think that UCI would be a fan of that either. So there are just so many factors that play such a role in the way Flanders Classics also has to act. But that doesn't particularly mean that we are satisfied with where we are, and that doesn't also mean that it is where we want to see the sport be at this point?
I think it ultimately comes down to this. Is the World Cup there to earn back the money that's been paid to the UCI, and thus paying in the end the bills of La Parchan's salary? Or is the World Cup there to promote cyclocross around the world and show what an amazing sport it is and try and grow that audience? And we've gone from the fact that it should be a global tool to promote the World Cup. That is the thing that they set out in their bidding guide. Like, the World Cup needs to increase the international appeal of cyclocross. We're seeing that we're not as international as we were. That's what needs to change. The World Cup needs to go to more countries. We need to engage more markets. And now that is totally gone, and we're all about, well, it's about getting the big names in the biggest series and making sure that we're not perceived as less important than other classifications, and that focus on showcasing the sport. Not that long ago, that certain UCI official was in a Sporza studio saying that the World Cup only a matter of time before we would go to all these amazing places. New York, Hong Kong, Johannesburg. Every newspaper got leaked another nice story so they could put that in their headline, because the sky was the limit after the Hoogheide World Championships. But what has come of that? As we expected back then, not much. And that's not where we should be focusing on right now. But the World Cup itself should be focused on captivating demand for the sport. And Glasgow is a good step in that direction. So it's not that nothing is being done, but within this format, you're never going to have this idea that we were once promised, and that I think the World Cup should pursue. The World Cup should be a tool to go to other countries. It's such an amazing thing, having a World Cup in a country. It gives riders something to work to. It gives, if you do it well, like in Benidorm, young riders the opportunity to race on the circuit that the pros do. And that's just a invaluable experience for them, and something that can really hook them onto the sport, that can create a burning passion for them. Standing there alongside the sandpit and just cheering on their local heroes for these young riders, or even for older people, just seeing them in action, it can really be just that motivator that they need to, after that, also tune into a couple of races and see them contend the World Championships. So I think that's what the World Cup should be, but within this format, that's become increasingly difficult, because what could they do? Well, they could expand on that Czech start and then maybe work their way somewhere in Eastern Europe, or maybe into Germany, Switzerland, Northern Italy. There's a couple of ways that you could make that maybe a 3-4 race opening. But because the Christmas period is the way it is, that's not going to change. We're going to have that many races at Christmas, and it has good parts to it as well. It's relatively cheap for riders to come. Riders that don't race the World Cups can race top-level courses. For fans, it is also nice. International fans, they can come to Belgium. They can stay there and visit all these cyclocross races. Young riders have a lot of learning opportunities. So it's not all bad, but I do think that the main priority of the World Cup should be something else. Priority of the World Cup should be to expand the engagement of the sport, and that, I think, will not be done, because this format of a pretty much December until January World Cup is encouraging the fact to just have as many commercially interesting races as possible, and it's a commercial risk to start building something new and take a shot on a city somewhere else, and maybe a country that doesn't have history of attending large crowds. But in the long run, that could be worth it. And I think that's where the main fundamental difference and conflict of interest and pain point of the World Cup lies, and why I will remain critical of it. I am fully aware of how much money is made in Belgium, and I am by no means saying that the World Cup should turn its back on Belgium. But if in the past we had 9 World Cup races, and 3 of them were in Belgium and 1 of them was in the Netherlands, I think it is more than fine that if the World Cup expands, those races are not in the same territory that you've already kind of fed to. You look elsewhere. I'm not against the 16 World Cup. I've always said it. But I want it to be a World Cup then. I want those races to be elsewhere. I'm not against a 12-race World Cup. But in that case, I would like those races to be outside of Belgium and the Netherlands, because all this has done is made that Belgium-Dutch calendar, and mainly the Belgian one, even more packed than it already was, and not really done much for the racing elsewhere.
It hurts the sport, because it's when the focus is really on that region, it can only help the development of that region, really, in terms of riders and also in terms of sponsorships and where the money really comes from. Well, if you dare to move outside of your comfort zone in a sense and really try to make the sport a little bigger. And that is an easy thing to say from the position I am, at least, but I feel that there is a lack of it, of that. And of course we had all those talks after the Hogerheide World Championships, and it was then all, at that time already, I think we were very skeptical of the things that were said, and we knew that it was not possible, some of the things that were said, but we were hoping that those ambitions would lead to other actions, at least. So it would lead towards the right direction, But it lacked that. It lacked it completely, and it was it's almost as if that momentum never existed. So I think that is maybe where the disappointment in a sense comes from, and I think that it is, as you said, I think that the World Cup should position itself not as the classification that is the most important only and makes financially the most money, has the best revenue and great reach, but I think that it also needs to be sort of it needs to be the base of your sport. If you look at how Formula One is, Formula One has all those feeder series, and it's over the years they have positioned themselves in such a way that everyone wants to achieve that in motorsports when you start. I think that for the World Cup, that it has to maybe go in that direction, that the World Cup is really something that you look up to and that you're being like, I want to, once I get older, I want to be there. And when you get venues in other regions where it's maybe, where cyclocross overall is not really discipline that is done as much as it is in Belgium, I think that is where you have to go to in a way. And if you're not, I think that you brought up darts. Darts is a great example of trying to be in certain regions where you wouldn't expect it to work, but there is the interest. And when you enable people to actually get going, I think that can only help you in the long run. And I think that development aspect is kind of lost because there is not really an incentive in terms of that financial reach as well, that they don't really see it, or they don't want to see it, or they think that it will cost them too much to see it. So it's that is kind of the thing. If you look at it, that is kind of disappointing, and I hope that will improve at some point. But I think that in a year or two, I think that we can maybe ask the question: was Flanders Classics all that good for the World Cup, and is it really the party that we need to have being responsible for the World Cup? Do we maybe does the UCI and the sport have to try and pursue something else? And there are contracts and all that, and there's obviously favoritism in a way, and they obviously have a partnership that is already lasting quite a while, so you will obviously see such a bias. But I think for the benefit of the sport, you maybe have to pursue another direction and look for another party, or maybe do it yourself as UCI. But that is gonna be maybe one of the avenues that I wouldn't say save the sport, but that could head the sport into a new direction, because I have the feeling that from Flanders Classics itself and the UCI at its current state, it's not really. I don't see it happening, to be honest. I don't see it happening. I think that this is already, we have to see this from those people as a success, and everything that we get on top of this is going to be a bonus, because I don't think it's going to be much, much better in the years to come.
Part of it is, of course, also the fact that they have paid a lot of money to acquire the right to organize the World Cup, and that is a big burden around it because of this bidding war between Flanders Classics and Golazzo. So I think that is something that in the future should be looked at critically by the UCI. I think the UCI in this, we're giving a lot of shit to Flanders Classics, but They're the organizers, so they're kind of where the stick ends, but we should also expand it to the UCI. The UCI isn't really saying anything like, hey, Flanders Classics, your World Cup doesn't meet our criteria. We don't really give a shit that you're saying you need these races. This is what we've stipulated for the World Cup. We want it to be international, so you better just do it. Like, the UCI isn't doing that either. The UCI doesn't really have any vision or anything going that direction for cyclocross either. They have their cyclocross coordinator, Christelle, and I think she does a relatively good job at the races. But I don't really know enough about the politics to know what kind of say she has about the overall direction of the World Cup. Like, is that her? Is that Lapartien? Is that now fully outsourced to Flanders Classics? I don't know. I don't really need to go and make this a Cyclocross Social UCI politics episode, but there's definitely some blame to fall there on the UCI as well. But to the point, the World Cup should be the most important series, but they shouldn't all of the time be talking about, oh, we have to be the most important series and kind of bullying the others. They should become the most important series by virtue of their event. The prize money, the overall prize money, close classifications, by far the best broadcast, recognizable, so that means that you don't run the same graphics for the Super Prestige as the World Cup, you don't run the same intro song for them, you don't use all the same cameras, slow-mos, everything. No, it's the World Cup. That's the most important. You raise the production level for that. And that brings me to this moment. Why am I so passionate about it right now, more so than maybe 2 years ago? Because I feel this is a golden opportunity for the sport. It's likely to be included in the 2030 Olympics, and you need to use that momentum already right now. Start building, start kind of venturing out of this idea that the sport is acting like, okay, I recognize it's not a big sport, but we also need to stop acting like we're just allowing us to be punched from left, right, top, center, backwards on the head every time. Like, oh, road does this, mountain bike does this, we'll just shrink our sport. No. Build your own sport. Like, don't care, we can't organize on Wednesday because of Champions League football. Who cares? Not everybody wants to watch Champions League. There's plenty of people who want to watch cyclocross. Like, be proud of the sport you are. Use the strong points. You have all the things road cycling doesn't have. Stop acting like the 10-year younger brother who's not allowed to hang out with his 17-year-old brother hanging with the guys from high school. Stop doing that. Claim what you are. You have all these fantastic figures in the sport, controversial figures, lots of clashes, always some friction between the teams, team managers with history, riders moving from one team to the other, Camille van den Berg secretly coaching athletes on another team and then leaving the sevens to go to that other team and then getting fired by the team. There's so much drama in this sport. You can come incredibly close, see them multiple times. Sponsors have a lot more visibility. You can charge relatively affordable tickets to your event. There's so many things in there. Start taking pride in that. As the World Cup, provide an English-speaking pit reporter so the international comms that don't have the ability to have somebody there know when somebody has a puncture. They know why somebody has left. The viewing experience, if you watch cyclocross on Sporza, is incomparable to if you're watching on English. And that is not necessarily at the fault of the English commentators. It's simply, if you have Sporza, you have these reporters on the start talking to somebody interesting. They are in the pits, they're running around, they're sweeping up the little scoops and what's going on here and what's going on there and a puncture. Yeah, indeed, a puncture. You went through a nail. They have the coaches with a microphone under them. I said that at the Belgian Championships. It's phenomenal. In what sport can you see the coaches of the athletes encouraging them, giving them tactical tips, giving them technical tips in the moment? We used to have it in road cycling, but they did away with it because the teams took control over that and said, well, you need to pay us money. And in cyclocross, it's still there, and I'm grateful for it. Start doing that. This, now with the Olympics coming up, you need to become more international, more pride, create an identity for your sport that goes beyond what it is right now. Leaning backwards, Van der Poel, Van Aert, great. The next riders will also do road and mountain bike and therefore only do the Christmas period. I very much fear that it's not sustainable for a sport to be just that short period. So, as the UCI, kind of start working around how you have a year round calendar. How can we make those things make sense? Is the World Championship still on the right date? How can we move these things around? Have these open discussions? What about the national championships? How does the World Cup fit in? How do we kind of preserve our athletes of not over racing at Christmas? There's so many factors that will come on the table when the sport becomes Olympic. But if you're only starting to do that once you've been included and after 2030, then you're going to be like, oh, how can we build on this? Then you're too late. Because you have one, maybe 2 years, I'm going to say one at most, after the World Championships before they make a decision in 2034 when they're in Salt Lake if cyclocross is going to remain on. And if you're then dropped immediately, it's going to be increasingly difficult to kind of fight your way back in. Because we gave it a shot, it didn't work out, the sport is not serious. So market that. Start having these little features before a World Cup of 5 minutes before the men's race and 5 minutes before the women's race in which one rider is highlighted and you show them on training or something. Make a YouTube documentary. Start broadcasting all the youth races. There's endless possibilities to create storylines and highlight the stuff that's going on. And I think that is kind of my final word here is I'm like, that's what needs to change. We need to be proud of this sport and not kind of accept this little place of, well, we have this 1 month period carved out for ourselves in which we are really big in Belgium. And yeah, that's kind of fine how it is.
It kind of comes back to the point of, for me at least, you have to be ready to seize that opportunity, because as you said, that could be only a one-time thing, the Olympics. And I think that if you look currently, especially for the English speaking, if you look at the broadcasting, the way it's done, and you look at if the level is currently on a level that is Olympic worthy in a sense, I don't think that it really is as a sport. I think that the broadcasting lacks quite a lot, and I feel that is. It's not a very hard fix. It needs just some small things to really improve the product overall, the viewing product, and it's a shame that we are not seeing that currently. Could be something that we will see in the future. I'm just a little afraid that it will, at the end of it, that it will become something where they, in like a year before the Olympics, they will kind of rush it and sort of a panic. Oh, we still have to do this, we still have to do that, we have to try and really get something together, and that is when you're going to rush these things, I don't think that it will be beneficial for the sport overall. So I feel that is definitely a danger that you don't really want to, that is avoidable if you are working on your product already right now, and it will be beneficial not only for the Olympics but also in the future. So yeah, that is really how I look at it. I think that the World Cup has a prime position to help the sport as well, or at least really take that's the position that they have currently, which is such a, in my opinion, is a very important position. And then I think that you can go ways. As I said, I don't think that there are going to be, there are obviously going to be certain elements of the sport that will not really, be changed in the next maybe even 5 years. But I think especially in terms of branding and marketing and all that, I think that there's a huge gap, because it feels like we have been standing still for like 10 years. I feel that there are initiatives, there are things that have been done, but I feel for a sport that lacks, that has a disadvantage in a way that is not really that doesn't really has reached its maximum potential yet. I feel that it is not really innovative, and it needs to change, it needs to be better, and I feel that is that should be the aim for the coming years. I think that in that area alone you can really gain something significant. So I hope that they will not let this opportunity go, and make the most out of it. And then I think that this sport definitely has still some growth in it.
It's about carving out a space for yourself and identity, because I think as an Olympic sport you need to have that. And of course, I think Van der Spiegel is right when he says, well, we're making our World Cup future proof, because it is a fact that more and more riders who are good in cross are also combining it with a career as road racer, and that will stay. But that doesn't mean that you can just allow that to be your sport, because there are full-time riders. They have a right to their career as well. And if you become an Olympic sport, I think even more so, you just need to accept that there will be riders venturing in and out of your sport. Mountain biking doesn't change their schedule just to accommodate for riders that are now on the road. Alan Hatherley, Van der Poel, Pidcock, they need to make their choices. But Peterson needs to make her choices on what they want to do. Prevost decides to drop mountain biking after an Olympic title to focus back on the road, because she wanted to take mountain biking as main priority to achieve the results that she got. And I think you as a sport need to accept that you can never accommodate for everyone, and certain things might mean that the stars, Van der Poel and such, start at the back at the World Championships or further at the back at the Olympics. I don't really see a reason to play favoritism to them. Like, you're a multidisciplinary rider, then you have to be good enough to deal with the consequences of that. If you don't want to do that, you are totally free. You have free will, to the extent that your sponsors allow it, of course, to do the other races. And if the sponsors don't allow you to do those races, then they'll have to deal with you maybe not getting that fame of the Olympic stage. You need to take a sport serious, and as a sport, you need to take yourself serious. And I think that is ultimately the main goal awaiting cyclocross right now. If they want to really prove themselves as an Olympic sport, the World Cup is an important tool for that. They need to expand beyond the Netherlands and Belgium, slowly but surely, adding one country at a time. But the current format doesn't really allow for that, because it's hard to see them ditch the Christmas period, because the economic center of the sport is still in Belgium. And that's fine. But then you need to wonder, okay, so then how do we plan the rest of our season so we have races without having too much fatigue, and we have a product that's interesting for people to watch without Van Aert and Van der Poel? Because now they're kind of holding the sport hostage, not by their own wrongdoing, but I feel because the sport is just enjoying their popularity and using that as the only marketing tool. I much more respect a race like Middelkerke. They figured, well, our date now after the World Championships, it's not really working for us anymore, but we're not going to complain about it. We are going to find an identity for ourselves. We're hosting a midweek race in the autumn break in Belgium, and we're going to make our course Halloween themed. We will have a night race, we will have floodlights, and we'll see what that does. And I respect that, because that makes Middelkerke a race that people can identify with, a child-friendly race to attend as well. Fun for children, nice little things around it, and that could be a quite cool addition to the calendar. So I think that is more a way to go for races, for the sport itself. Showcase what you have, add little things around it. Every MLB game in the US has a little theme to it. The Italian Heritage Night game at the San Diego Padres, or I don't even remember what the Rockies game was called when I was there, but there's always something going on. When I was at the Boston Red Sox last summer, they had a Puerto Rican Heritage Night, and there was a band outside playing Puerto Rican music, and they had special jerseys being sold that week. Like, those are things to kind of, because there's so many MLB games, to make all of them different and cater to a little niche audience for all of them and sell a little bit more merchandise. But it works, because there are always people that come for that stuff, because they want the hat, they want the jersey, they want whatever little special menu items they have. And it's a cool little way to make more than 160 baseball games in a season. And we're complaining about 30 cyclocross races for riders, but different sports, I know. But I just think that that's more the way to go when you're a sport like cyclocross, trying to find your place, proving your worth to the Olympics, than just what they've been doing now so far.
I feel like in cycling overall, like if I take it, mountain bike, road cycling, and cyclocross as a whole, for argument's sake, I think that merchandise is really I wouldn't say an untouched area, but it's definitely something that you could work with, or at least do more with, because at this point it's just there's not really much. I think there is more on the fake market than there is than there really is. You would maybe buy a replica of a certain team because you would know you want to race with it or something. But I honestly feel like there is like a huge untouched market there that you could really use, and it's basically free marketing. It's just on a very low level, but it is a level that you should not underestimate. So yeah, there's just so many things, and I think we can talk on that marketing stuff for quite a while, because it just feels like there are just so many opportunities that are haven't even been tried, So yeah, I always feel when we have these discussions that at a certain point I just become, I wouldn't say clueless, but I don't really know where to start and where to end it, because there is just so much that you could really touch upon and go over, and that is just, I think that when you have that, just really, in my opinion at least, it really just shows you that there is so much that you can do with the sport. There is so much that you could try, because not everything that you will do will be successful. But if you haven't tried it, I mean, that accounts to absolutely nothing. So at least try to contribute to the sport, or try to make your money, if that is really the way you want to go with it. If you really want to just set yourself financially in a sense, well, maybe that should then be the motivation. But at least try something. And it feels that sometimes that incentive of trying something is really lacking with the parties involved in the sport.
Well, we're gonna end it here. I will briefly give the calendars of the other series. They're not too interesting. The Super Prestige has the same races, just in a different order. Overijse opening it at the end of October. Then Middelkerken, Niel, Merksplas, Ruddervoorde now in December. Heusden, Zolder, Diegem and Gullegem. So now ending before the World Championships. It will be the first series to conclude. Took some time to find it, but we have the Cyclocross series somewhere burdened in their Instagram feed. Dendermonde moving from the World Cup to the Cyclocross series as the season opener. Going to be more of that fast race most likely than Meulenbeke, Heerde, Lokeren, Mol, Maldegem and Sint-Niklaas. So that means that Lokeren is also new here. That's because the X2O trophy has made some changes. Oudenaarde is still the opener, now in a single weekend of X2O action. 2 weeks later, Hamme-Zogge, then Beringen, now also in the X2O series. Hofstade, Loenhout, Baal at Christmas, and then Lille and Brussels after the World Championships. So, that's that, Issam. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We will be back at some point to discuss a bit more about some other topics, maybe a transfer update podcast at some point, although we're mainly waiting for the action to unravel. But that will be it for today, guys. Thanks for listening. A long discussion. Hopefully we didn't get too salty. Let us know if you have any thoughts on the World Cup overall in the comments, and we will be back soon. Goodbye.